Um, yes, and we are recording the meeting just to let you know so that this will be posted. Um, the network in general is just a group of teachers and other people who do physics education who are looking to make physics education better in a lot of ways. We are teacher led and we put on sort of these sorts of things that we hope will help teachers. More about that later. If you want to join us, we always have lots of events and you can get added to our list. But we have a really great talk this morning. John Pinizzotto, who is from AP, and is the leader of AP Physics, is going to talk about some of the changes. He will be giving a very short talk, so 15, 20-ish minutes during the talk. If you can hold your questions till the end, if you want to ask them by raising your hand towards the end, or if you want to put them in the chat, we'll be moderating in the chat and make sure that we get those questions answered. Um, yeah, and I think that's it. John, if you want to go ahead.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is John Pinizzotto. I work for College Board. I am the director of AP Physics C Mechanics. I'm going to give you a quick little spiel of things, right? I have just a quick little PowerPoint just to make sure I don't just ramble on about nothing for an hour, right? So just a quick little slide deck hopefully gives you a big overview of the things that we're doing and that we have done and that's coming up for the exam in 2025. And then I'm hoping to answer as many of your questions as I possibly can. Um, so there you go. That's what I'm gonna do. All right, so I'm going to share that little window. Jolene, can you give me a little thumbs up? Is that coming through? Fantastic. All right. So here we go. There are actually 7 people at the College Board now who work on AP Physics. You might know some of them, but so there I am in the bottom left. Again, so I'm the Director of Physics and Mechanics. We have Amy Johnson, who does Physics 1, Holly Mosley doing Physics 2, Jesse Miner does E&M. And then we have some Liz Wenk, also mostly doing P1, Kyle Curry doing P2, and Blake Winnick, who is helping with E&M. And then we very soon, you might notice, well, where's the mechanics helper? And she is starting soon, but she hasn't officially started yet, so I'm loath to put her name on there yet, just in case, something dramatic happens, which, knock on wood, won't happen. So there you go. So let's talk about the course revisions real quick. So again, this is effective this year, so this past fall. So hopefully if you've been teaching, you already know about this, and this is a change for 2025. If you don't know about this, and this is new information, it's okay. As we'll talk about here in a second, it's not going to be a big deal, but it is going to mean that the exam that your kids are taking in 2025 is going to be a little bit differently formatted than maybe you expected before today. What we do every now and then is we just want to do like a revision or realignment. We do a little study to make sure that what we're doing and how we're assessing things is aligned to what college courses are doing, the college expectations. And then we want to make sure that we communicate all that to all the stakeholders and people who are using the AP Physics curriculum and exams to help their students gain college access. So that's what we did, right? So we're just making sure, and as I'm sure you guys know, because you're in this community, physics education in particular has undergone a significant shift over the past 10, 15, 20-ish years, right? And so we want to stay up with those changes, right? We want to make sure that we're assessing kids in the most effective way to make sure they actually understand physics and aren't just regurgitating facts or just crunching numbers, right? So what we wanted to do, these overall goals of the revisions, right? So a big high level view of why we did what we did, right? Or sort of what we want the outcomes to be, right? So the first obvious one, we want to make sure that they're aligned with their corresponding college course, right? So for Physics 1, that's an algebra-based introductory physics course. Physics 2, algebra-based second semester course, so mostly E&M, thermo, optics, and some modern physics. And then the calculus-based mechanics and E&M. We also wanted to take this opportunity to make the 4 courses a cohesive unit, right? So the AP Physics courses are unique in the AP kind of course world because they're so tightly tied together, right? The connections between the 4 courses are very strong. So we wanted to streamline them, simplify them, and have them share commonalities where they are, right? So the example I always use is that Newton's third law is Newton's third law in all four courses, right? So what you don't need to restate it in different ways over and over and over again. That just confuses teachers, it confuses students. And so, where things can be shared, share them. In the process of sharing those things between the courses, what that lets us do is actually differentiate the courses better, right? Because where things are shared, it's really obvious, and where things are different, it then becomes really obvious where things are different. So especially between Physics 1 and Physics C mechanics, it highlights some of those differences and where the additional content for Physics C is. And so we're using that to our advantage as well. At least that was our goal. And then the big goal, I think, for teachers is our goal as we were doing this was that there's minimal disruption to what you actually need to be doing in the classroom, right? So that if what you're doing in your high school classroom, if your kids are happy, they're super jazzed up about physics, they're doing really well on the exam. If you did absolutely nothing differently, you'd be A-okay, right? Like your students would still do well on the exam. They would still know how to answer the questions. We're scoring things in the same way, right? So if you're a teacher that isn't in this community, doesn't go to APSIs in the summer, doesn't come to the reading, doesn't do anything, and you're just off doing your own thing, and you didn't know about any of these things, and you were having success last year, you should have success this year. So if there's one thing that I'm hoping that you can take away from all this today, is that, right? If I was finding success last year and I don't change anything, I'll be all right. Right? Like we're not intending this to be a big, huge shift or departure from what we had been doing in the past. We're restructuring and realigning things and not changing sort of the general approach and sort of like pedagogical philosophy that we're all about. So what exactly did we revise that, right? So the course frameworks, we rewrote and restructured all those. So the units, topics, learning objectives, and essential knowledge statements. So that's from like the higher order down to the smaller grain detail. The science, practice, and skills we rewrote, and then the content was revised a little bit. But what we really did was try to rewrite them in actual English instead of like educational jargon, right? And so the content is actually the same, right? For the great majority, with a couple of exceptions, right? But Newton's third law is still in Physics 1. Surprise, surprise, right? Rotation is still rotation, and momentum is still momentum. We just wrote it in a different way that we hope is accessible and understandable to all teachers, especially new teachers who are getting thrown into physics unexpectedly at their high school. So we want to make sure that it was accessible and easy to read, easy to understand, and then in that vein, make sure that it was clear of what we would assess, like what we are saying we will assess, or we might assess, and things that we're not going to assess, right? So not that you can't teach them, but we're not going to ask questions about them. So we want to make sure that was very, very clear. And then the course and exam descriptions. That's all the filler text around the actual course framework. So the course frameworks is the nuts and bolts of like what we're actually going to assess. The actual course and exam descriptions is all the other stuff in this big giant PDF that we publish. So things like what are task verbs, right? What are we actually going to ask kids to do? Some ideas on instructional approaches, right? So if you're looking like what should I do in my classroom? I'm bored of just doing PowerPoints. What else can I do? There are some ideas for some instructional approaches, right? You don't have to do them. But they're ideas. They were put together by a lot of incredibly talented teachers. And there's some really good ideas in there. There's some stuff I'm sure that you might be like, no, that's garbage. But there's probably some stuff that you're like, oh, I might try that. That'd be good. There's also sample questions in the CEDs if you're looking for sample FRQs. There's a little blurb about vocabulary and important ideas, specifically things like systems, how you define systems, why we say the word object all the time instead of not object, right? Why do we say object instead of point mass, right? So some things like that. So there's a little thing in there. And then the equation sheets are at the very, very end. What reference information are my students going to have access to on the exam? And then there's also information then about the classroom resources, and then actually information about the exams, which I'll talk about here in just a second. So as far as the actual content revisions, right? So there's a little bit of content changes, mostly in Physics 1. So for physics one, we added unit 8, which is fluids, right? Um, and fluids in this case, it's a pretty light treatment of fluids, right? Like we're not going to do the Navier-Stokes theorem in algebra-based physics one, right? Like that's just not a thing that we're going to do, right? But what we are going to do with fluids is, the basics of essentially conservation of energy and forces with gooey stuff, right? Like that's essentially what we're doing, right? And so we felt this was a really good sort of capstone unit to physics one because it's all the applications of the things you've been learning all year. You're just doing it with stuff that can change shape, and you put it in a tube instead of on a table, right? Um, we took out mechanical waves and sound, and by removed, we moved that to physics two. So it's not gone from the AP physics curriculum. It's just in physics two instead of physics one. And then electrostatics and things like that, that was in the original inception of physics one back in 2014. Circuits and electrostatics actually got taken out of physics one during the COVID, the 2020 exam. And we haven't ever put it back because it never really kind of belonged there in the first place. But that's a whole other story that we don't need to talk about. AP Physics 2, we added a couple little small things, right? So we added specific heat, right? So specific heat lets us quantitatively connect thermodynamics to some concepts, right? To actually quantitatively talk about the transfer of thermal energy. Mechanical waves and sound, like I said, got bumped into Physics 2. Which isn't that much of an additional content because we already had electromagnetic waves. We already had, right? So we're just talking about mechanical waves in addition to electromagnetic waves. And then we added black body radiation, again, as a way to link thermodynamics to modern physics, right? So now that modern physics unit at the very end of Physics 2 has connections to every single unit preceding modern physics, right? So I actually am super stoked that black body radiation is in there because it links thermodynamics to modern physics, and because I was an astronomer by training, I suppose. So I guess I have a soft spot for it. We took out relativity, wave and wave functions, and then unit 8, which was fluids. So we took out relativity and wave functions, not because we don't like them, but because often, those aren't covered by a lot of collegiate level courses, right? I mean, that's later. And then for the purposes of what we're doing with Physics 2, there's not a whole lot you can assess on relativity and wave functions at the algebra-based high school level, right? I mean, they're really fun. It's awesome to talk about. People love talking about spandex sheets and bowling balls, right? But there's not a whole lot that we can actually assess on the exam with a high school algebra background. So we took those out, although you should definitely still teach those if you like them and your kids like them. For mechanics and E&M, we didn't really change anything, right? So we added some explicit references to things within the context of the courses, but those things were actually already there, right? Like so they were just kind of buried in the lead, essentially, right? So there was like a couple throwaway references to physical pendula and mechanics, right? But we've had entire free response questions about physical pendulum, and so if you weren't closely reading the previous course and exam descriptions, you could very easily miss the fact that physical pendulums were part of the course, right? And so we've actually just pulled that out. We've elaborated on those things. We try to make it very, very clear about what we will and what we won't ask questions about. The same thing for E&M, right? So we added some clarity around dielectrics, current density, and LC circuits. Again, like that was stuff that was pretty much already in the course. We've just added context. We've added information to help, again, teachers know what exactly kids need to know in order to answer the questions we're going to ask. So there you go. With all this stuff, we have updated all of our resources that we provide teachers, AP teachers, for free. So a lot of the stuff is you have to be an authorized or approved AP teacher. So there's some kind of paperwork that you have to go through with your school and your AP coordinator to get access to these materials, but they are free once your school, gives you that access. So with the rollover, so every July 1st, AP Classroom gets refreshed, essentially. So in July 1st, that's when we refreshed all these revisions. So there's newly authored topic questions, progress checks, AP daily videos. All the teacher-created assignments should still be accessible. And as I know, there are lots of questions about already, but John, not all of them are available yet. And that is true. You are correct. Although some of them actually just came out yesterday. Some more were put on AP Classroom yesterday. So, and the reason for that is because it is a massive amount of questions that we have been writing for like the past 2 years. Actually, we've been trying to write these questions. And as I'm sure you know, physics is actually incredibly fragile, and we are trying not to break it. So often one word that is or isn't in a physics problem can break the physics problem, right? Like all of a sudden with the omission or with the inaccurate use of one word, right? Like you say velocity, but you meant speed, right? Like that can break a physics problem. And so we're trying to make sure we have lots of reviewers. We're making sure we're trying really hard to not have anything broken. And then the process from getting the items from people who wrote them, people who reviewed them, people who fixed them into the database, and then from that database into the platform where AP Classroom actually lives. It's a big, complicated process, and there are entirely too much work and not nearly enough people, and so things have gotten delayed unexpectedly since we that we thought earlier in the year, even right. Right now, I think everything should be released by the beginning of December-ish, right? So it's the final stages of publication. We're really trying to tidy everything up and then publish them soon, hopefully by the beginning of December. There will be 3 new authored practice exams. The first one is already in AP Classroom and AP Central. And the second and third ones are going to be published in early 2025. So I think we're targeting a February, early March. So, but hopefully earlier, but by February. There's also an AP Physics 1 Fluids Lab. There's extra chapters to the workbook if you're a fan of the workbook, which if you're not, hopefully it's because you haven't seen it, but there's the workbook in AP Classroom, which is an incredible set of resources to help students through that. So we added some extra fluids content because we anticipated that teachers might be more apprehensive about the fluids content than any of the other things you might be changing. So we wanted to give extra support for those units. Okay, so let's actually talk about the exams real quick. So again, this is starting this fall, but the first exam is in 2025 this spring. So again, some goals of the exams that we wanted to do was to reliably differentiate across all performance abilities, right? So we want to make sure we want to be able to tell the difference between a kid that knows almost nothing about physics, right? And a kid that knows a whole lot of physics, right? Like that's a wide range of students, right? So did you learn literally anything, right? We want to differentiate between the student who learned a little bit of something and the kid who didn't learn anything. And we also want to be able to differentiate between the kid who is like a super solid physics rock star and a kid who's just really good at physics, right? So we want to be able to differentiate across that whole band. We want to give kids opportunities to demonstrate what they know, right? So like let's let kids show off. We want them to show us what they learned throughout the year. We want to make sure that things are consistent across the course. We know a lot of teachers teach Physics 1 and Physics 2, or Physics 1, 2, and Mechanics, or Physics 1 and Mechanics, right? So we want it to be consistent so that there's not like a different kind of approach for Mechanics versus P1. And so we're hoping that FRQ structure will allow teachers to have a better understanding of how to, more consistent teaching opportunities, but then also hopefully provide students with preparation strategies to approach each question. So if you're like, hey, I know I'm going to be good at the lab question, I'm going to do that first. I know where those questions are going to be. That's going to be in question 3, right? Oh, I know I'm going to want to draw some graphs. Where am I going to go? I'm going to sketch that out. And then you know where to find those. And then those skills are consolidated into one little spot. So the structure here, there's 2 sections like there's always been. Section 1 is a multiple choice section. It's going to be 40 questions, 80 minutes, and worth 50% of a student's exam score. There's 1 correct answer and 4 answer choices. So that is a shift from the P1 and P2 exams. The previous years, there was a couple of questions at the end that had 2 correct answers. And while those are really great formative tools to use in the classroom, we found they are not good assessment tools to help put kids in those boxes, right? Those sort of slots of how much you've learned. 4 answer choices, again, for mechanics and E&M. There used to be 5 answer choices. Now there's only 4. Again, statistically, it turns out there's actually not much of a difference between 4 answer choices and 5. So let's just use 4. Section 2 is a free response, also 50% of students' grade. That's 4 questions, 100 minutes. There's 4 questions, the math routines question, a translation between representations question, a lab analysis, and a quantitative translation question. Those are in the same order every single year on every single test, right? So the ordering of those questions is the same. And then the course specific weighting of the topics and the science practices are in those courses, course and exam description. So as you might guess, Physics C Mechanics has a greater percentage of kind of like mathematical derivations questions than Physics 1 does, right? So there's more mathematical routines. And that's really the biggest difference between the courses and then, of course, like the topics, right? So there's that, right? So again, the same for every course. And then the task models, right? So again, there's 4 questions. And really the short version of the task models of what we want to do. So the way that I kind of visualize what we tried to do is the old FRQ sections, the previous FRQ questions were kind of like a stir fry, where you threw a bunch of ingredients into like a wok, you cooked them all up, and then at the end of the day, you had this very nice chicken fried rice, right? Where it's all mixed together. You have rice and peas and all the things. It's all mixed together. And what we have done to help students figure out how, like if you're a picky eater and you don't want to eat the carrots in your chicken fried rice, like what we tried to do is put all the carrots in a pile on their plate, all the peas in a pile on their plate, all the rice in a pile on their plate, right? So separate everything out so that you know where to go, if you know kind of which bits you want to go for first, right? So the ingredients are all the same. What we're asking kids to do is the same. It's just how we have organized it. We are hoping provides teachers with a structure to prepare their students better, and then it gives students the structure to let them attack the test better so that they are more able to demonstrate all that awesome stuff that they have learned throughout the year. So that's the goal. And then that's what we did. Super high, super fast, and I already went over my sort of right at the 20 minutes, I suppose. But that's what I have there. So that's a whole lot of information that I can give you guys. And then I'm not sure what the sharing is, but I can definitely put this all up in a PDF, and I can hopefully give it to Jolene or Sarah to share with you guys after this. Although I guess there will also be the recording for you to pause later while you're watching TV or something. I don't know. So I have a whole bunch of questions here, and then I will try to go through these.
Yeah, hold on. You're just going to
Sure
stop and
thing.
pop in the chat. And then just so everyone else is aware, if you can raise your hand or put your questions in the chat, either one is fine. We'll try to get to both of them as we go. And if you don't know how to raise your hand, oh no, now I've forgotten how to raise your hand. Okay, there's a way to do it, and I will hopefully you guys remember. Okay, go ahead. Oh, the
So
X
this first,
button. Thank you. Sorry.
just want me to go through the chat here real quick.
Yeah,
All
if
right.
you want to start with the chat questions, and then we'll come and get people with
All right.
additional.
So Jeremy's question here seems to be fluids and gravitation in C, right? So basically teaching them like incorporating those ideas throughout the year or as culminating units throughout the year. So and then one choice is made for fluids in P1 and gravitation. So what's interesting about that, so what I think I'm understanding with this question is like, why is fluids its own little unit at the end versus like gravitation in physics C used to be a unit at the end, and now we've kind of shoved it all in with forces, and there's a little bit with like rotation and things like that. So why did we split up gravitation in mechanics and not split up fluids in P1, even though you can most definitely teach fluids throughout the year in P1? There's no reason why you have to teach it at the end. And the answer to that is because we know people in P1, or we anticipated that people in P1 were going to get freaked out about fluids, right? And so we wanted to put it all in one spot so that when people were saying, wait a minute, there's fluids, like where do I go? Where do I go to figure out what about fluids is in the course and what's out of the course, right? And so it's like a one-stop shop, right? As especially for new teachers who are unfamiliar or uncomfortable with fluids, now I can just kind of put it in one spot on my plate. As opposed to with mechanics, it's not new content, right? And I think the force of gravity goes with forces, and satellite motion goes with angular momentum. Although I guess you could put it pretty much wherever you want, but angular momentum's the easiest way to do it, right? So And so since that wasn't new content, we felt it was better to kind of chop it up and put it where it belongs, as opposed to as like a big kind of capstone unit. Um, is that good? Okay, Jeremy gave me a thumbs up. All right. So Nicole says, for kids at P1 who want to take the mechanics exam, are there specific things we need to make sure we tell the kids they need to know aside from applying calculus? So yeah, there's a couple of topics that are extra in mechanics that aren't in P1. The most notable ones are like resistive forces. That's a whole unit now. So I think that's unit 2.9, I believe it is, in the mechanics curriculum. So that's a good one to make sure you hit. Physical pendulums is another one. That's also a whole unit now. I think it's like 7.5, 7 something. It's in the oscillations unit. Um, uh, Gravitation inside of a body is in mechanics, right? So we Newton's shell theorem, but it's essentially Gauss's law with mass instead of charge, right? Like so that's in there. And that's actually a really good thing to kind of train kids on if they then go on to E&M, where it's like, hey guys, it's the same. It's just with charge instead of mass, right? So like that's in there. Um, and those, I think, are the three big ones that I can think of off the top of my head, trying to go as fast as I can, unless anybody can think of an obvious one that I left off. The other one would actually be torque. The right-hand rule for torque is in mechanics, but it's not in P1. And that's the only place the right-hand rule comes up in mechanics is with torque. But we put it in there, again, as a way to differentiate mechanics from P1, but also because, if you're training up to go take E&M, right? Like you've already seen the right-hand rule once. Let's do the right-hand rule some more, right? And then all of a sudden it's not quite as scary, hopefully in E&M. Questions when you find with wrong answers. There is an official email address to send wrong answers to. I believe that is still apfeedback@collegeboard.org. I will put that in the chat. And then that's the best place to send it. But of course, you can always CC me and I'll put my email in here as well. Like I said, we're trying really hard to have them not be broken, but physics is hard. It's I don't know. It's hard to get everything right with so many questions, I guess, right? So if you email me, we can, or AP feedback, hopefully we can fix those as quickly as possible. Why can't AP Physics C teachers have access to Physics 1? We have asked this over and over and over again. I don't know why we don't let you guys have access to all the other stuff. We try every year. I will bring it up yet again. It's mostly because I think of the way AP Classroom is structured on the back end with like kind of what files live where and what you're told to do. I will bring it up yet again. In the meantime, what I would encourage you to do is there are some online support groups, right? So there's like the National AP Physics Teachers Facebook group, which is not officially tied to College Board, but it's not like I'm unaware that it exists, right? So it's kind of one of those things. So there's a whole lot of teachers on there that are willing to share materials with you if you ask nicely, right? There's also like Pretty Good Physics, which is a Google group. They will also share materials with you. APSIs are also a good place for the summer institutes. I know those are kind of like there's a pay wall there, right, to go depending on your how supportive your high school administration is. But most of those AP consultants, if not all of them, are more than willing to share all the things that they have in their Google Drives and Dropboxes of things, right? So there are ways to get that access with a little bit of extra effort while we try to get all those things for you.
Can I jump in one thing about getting to the APSI, which are very useful but also cost money? If you aren't aware of this, if you teach in a low-income school, there's some Title I money to send you to some of these, and it's worth asking. It varies by state. There's some things, but It's at least that's how when I was a teacher, I was able to go to an APSI with some Title I money. So keep that in mind.
Also, I was told I would encourage you to read through the AP Coordinator's Handbook because I was told recently that your school should get a piece of the exam fee from students, right? So the exam fee does not all go to College Board, and some of it is actually kind of returned to the school as a way to reinvest in their AP program, either with like paying for proctors for the exams or other ways to reinvest and support their AP teachers. So I believe that information is in the AP Coordinator Handbook, which is available on the internet. And if you look at that information, you might be able to use that economic information to convince your administrator to give you a piece of the pie and fund some professional development. Mariana asked essentially a very good question, which I'm going to try to summarize, which is there's an achievement gap between male students and female physics students and minority test takers and non-minority test takers, right? Like that's the shortest version of that. And have we investigated it and are we attempting to rectify it? And the answer is yes, and we're trying real hard. I think as much as everybody else is too, right? So this is especially in science, right? Like both, I think, female students and minority students are underrepresented in almost all the sciences, especially in physics. And it's something that we're trying really, really hard to address, and we're trying really, really hard to rectify, right? But to that end, like we need your help, right? So we try really, really hard to get as many different voices on to help us develop the exams and to help us work with students as we possibly can. And so, we need voices to help us to help find those students, right? To help provide them the support that we need. And so, to that end, I would say, if you're interested in helping us narrow those gaps, please reach out because we are trying. We are most definitely trying. So we have programs to reach out to at-risk students, disadvantaged schools. Like so, we have a lot of those programs in place, but ultimately those programs don't work if no one takes part, right? So we really need teachers to help us with that mission, because it's hard, right? Like we're working at it. So teaching mechanics, the content in mechanics is conceptually harder than the ones that are in AP classroom. Yeah, and then the topic questions are coming, right? So first of all, the AP daily videos are really supposed to be kind of like support videos for content that you'd be teaching in class, right? Like they're not intended to be kind of like study aids or reviews or like a deep dive into content or problem solving, right? So the AP daily videos were intended to be these little short videos of just like reinforcement of of like the big concepts and ideas that you would have covered in class, and not like I said, like a deep dive into the weeds about specific problems. So that's probably why the videos aren't then oh, wait. I'm gonna so those are harder than the topic question. The topic questions too are intended to be these like quick little check formative assessments, right? So like the best way to think of it is maybe like a bell ringer, right? Like or like a bell opener, right? Hey kids, come in, answer these two topic questions, right? Like just a real quick formative conceptual check, right? So they're supposed to be low stakes. They're like formative checks, and they're not supposed to mirror the questions on the exam, right? So the AP classroom is supposed to be helping support teachers on their way to the exam and not have every single question on the topic questions be a summative end of the year level question. Like I said, the other ones are going to be released right now. Mechanics, I think everything, the date is like early December is the current date, which is, and I'm really hoping that stays the date. It's gotten pushed back. But right now, this day on November 9th, it's like the beginning of December is the date where all of the rest, like everything should be published by the beginning. And that's actually, I think, true for P1 and P2. No, P1 and E&M. I think P2, the last few units are later than everything else. But I think all the courses for the great majority should be done by the beginning of December. So when preparing students for the current Physics C students for the new FRQ format, do I think the P1 questions are good tools since they're already divided, or are past APC questions still the better prep? So I think the past APC FRQs are still the better prep. So if you look at the FRQs, especially from the past 6 years, right? Although even older than that, I actually just got from a consultant the original AP exams from like 1955 and 56. And even in those exams, throughout the entire history of AP Physics, we have asked kids to justify their reasoning. What would happen if you did this, right? Like questions beyond just derive the expression for y and calculate the range of the projectile, right? So over the past couple of years, especially for Physics C, those are the questions. Again, we're asking the exact same types of questions. We're going to be grading student responses in the same way. What we've done is we've just chopped them up and put them and reorganize them into different places. So the old FRQs are still really good test prep for your course. And again, like I said during my little presentation, the goal is that if you taught Physics C and you didn't come to any of these meetings and you didn't get to talk to anybody and you didn't know that the exam was changing, your kids would come back to you in May and say, yo, Mr. P, why was there 4 questions on the exam instead of 3? And you'd be like, wait, what? Right? But your kids, what they would not be saying is, I didn't know how to answer any of the questions. These questions were totally different than the ones we did in class. I didn't know how to answer these, right? Like the same types of questions, just restructured and reorganized and reformatted. Yeah, so if I didn't get your question yet, let me know. Like when I scanned through the questions, a lot of them were very similar to kind of like I think along the same thread that the current questions are being asked. But please, if I didn't answer your question, you have a question, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. Are there plans to introduce workbooks for the other APC course? The other workbooks for the other courses are on the wish list, but they're not on the to-do list. I guess that's right. So they're on the wish list. They're not on the to-do list. That being said, the Physics 1 workbook is still very good for Physics C mechanics. When I was teaching, I had there was pages in the Physics 1 workbook that would give my Physics C kids a run for their money and would challenge them to think, and are still good teaching tools, even though it says AP Physics 1 in the header, right? There are chapters from the Physics 1 workbook about circuits and electrostatics back when circuits and electrostatics was part of Physics 1, also with like sounds and waves. I think those might have gotten removed from the internet, but again, I think if you go to those original PDFs are still digitally available from the people who have them, and so again, like asking around on some of those online communities, I'm sure you could get PDFs of those, which would be good for Physics 2, or again for E&M, right? Like electrostatics is electrostatics.
Can I jump in one thing right here?
Of course.
This is also, we are going to have a follow-up coffee talk to this, which we will put the link oh, thank you, it's there. And this would also be a good place if you're looking for resources like the workbook and how to teach things and like what people are doing to learn some of the new topics, and have even more specific questions. That would be a good place to ask some of this, because I know that a lot of people need more resources on like how do I act, what do I give the students, like how if there's a topic I don't understand fully, what can I do to make sure I understand it? Those things would be great for the coffee talk coming up. Great. Go ahead, Keith.
Awesome. Next question, are Kepler's 3 laws in P1? And the answer is yes, but not by name, right? Or at least I think they're referred to by name in the course and exam description, but we're not going to expect kids to know Kepler's 3 laws. Although I take that back now that I'm actually saying it out loud. Only Kepler's 3rd law is referenced by name, right? So the T squared is 4 pi squared over GM times R cubed, right? It's the 4 pi on top, right? Is that right? I can't ever. Anyway, so So that one is referenced by name, but it also does say there's a boundary statement that says we don't expect kids to know that by name, right? So we're not ever going to ask kids like use Kepler's third law, right? Like, so Kepler's third law is one of those things that's a derived equation if you plug in gravity and circles, right? So you get Kepler's third law. So it's in there and it's referenced by name, but it's not something that we're going to expect kids to just know by name, right? As opposed to something like Ampere's law and E&M, right? So we do refer to Ampere's law by name because it's like a big, giant fundamental principle of E&M, right? The first two laws aren't like explicitly in P1 or mechanics, but they still are because Kepler's first two laws are essentially results of conservation of angular momentum, right? And gravity, right? So like we don't call them out as like a equal areas and equal times kind of thing, right? But angular momentum is conserved, so there's that. And so we felt like we didn't put the first two laws in P1 or mechanics, especially by name, because they're essentially empirical relationships and not fundamental properties of nature because of how Kepler chunked his data and didn't actually know any physics, right? I mean, he did physics, right? But like, he just took data, stole it. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so why are students encouraged to take algebra and calc at physics when at the college they take one or the other, but not both? Again, so it's one of the recommended pathways by schools. I don't think that we necessarily at College Board recommend that as any sort of official recommendation for success. I mean, I know. So again, personally, when I was in the classroom, my mechanics students typically matriculated up from my P1 course, typically, right? I mean, and sometimes there were kids. I've had, students can be successful in mechanics and E&M without having taken P1, right? I think in high school, though, my experience was that the more physics that you expose kids to, the easier it gets the next time around, right? And so calculus based physics especially is like you're learning how to play ice hockey and ice skate at the same time, right? Like you're learning the calculus and you're learning the physics at the same time. And that's you're learning a new thing in a foreign language, right? And that's very, very difficult. And so if you can give kids the physics foundation, that helps them just take some of the pressure off of the content so they can focus on the language, so to speak, right? But is it required? Absolutely not, right? Like, is it encouraged maybe at your school, maybe by teachers who found success with that method? But it's not. You can find success in a variety of ways, and I think again, you can find success in calculus-based physics without having taken algebra-based physics. Yep. Yep. Okay. Will there be an online calculator? Okay, so let's talk about the digital exam. So Nancy slash Patrick is asking some good questions about the digital exam. So this year, which I actually didn't talk about in my little spiel, but this year the exam is going to be a hybrid digital exam. So what does that mean, John? What that means is that kids are going to get the questions on a computer, like a Chromebook, laptop, desktop computer. I don't think it works on a cell phone, but so a school-owned computer. The exam is still proctored in school, right? So it's not like in 2020 when kids were just at home on their computer taking the exam, right? So it's still a proctored, secure environment at your school. It's just the questions are delivered on a computer instead of like a test booklet. It's a hybrid digital exam because it turns out, as I'm sure you know, physics is very hard to do on a keyboard, right? And until we figure out how to do physics fluently on a keyboard, we don't want to do physics on a keyboard, right? And so kids are going to have a booklet, an answer booklet, like a printed paper that they can write their answers on, right? So they're going to have their screen, they're looking at the question, and then they're writing their answers down in a paper booklet on the desk. And then you're going to mail in the answer booklet to us to grade in Florida, just like you always did in the previous years, right? On the hybrid booklet, what's that going to be is it's going to show all the figures that they have to draw on, and then essentially blank spaces for them to write in, right? So if they have to draw a free body diagram, even if it's just a black dot that says draw a free body diagram on the black dot, that black dot will be printed in the answer booklet. If it's like a sketchograph of velocity as a function of time, the axes will be printed in the answer booklet and kids will draw on the graph, right? So anything like any sort of figure or diagram that students have to draw on is reproduced in the booklet for them to draw on. What is not reproduced in the booklet are like the sort of the primer figures, right? So like that header figure at the beginning of an FRQ where it has like a block sliding down a ramp and then it hits a spring because, what would physics be without a block on a ramp with a spring, right? So that primer picture where like, it labels X and H and K and all that kind of stuff, that picture is not in the answer booklet. So we have a limit to how many pages we can print in the answer booklet, and including those images wasn't in the page count, is the shortest version of that story. But those will be on their screen, right? And they can see those, but they won't be in there. They will have the option to have scratch paper in both the multiple choice and the free response sections, right? So if they want, so if they need to write stuff not in their booklet, they'll have that. And then I guess like with this graph paper, yes. So for making a graph, there'll be that graph paper. The calculator, there is a calculator embedded in the testing application. It's essentially, it essentially does all the things like a TI-84 could do, right? And so this is actually something that I'm actually excited about because in my mind, this actually narrows the equity gap a little bit between the students who can afford a TI graphing calculator and the kids who can't, right? And so what this does is it essentially gives everybody a graphing calculator on the exam, which they can do some extra things, right? So it does all the same things that a regular calculator can do. Yes, apparently if there's an email that said it was Desmos, yes, it's Desmos, right? So it's essentially the Desmos graphing app, I think, in the testing app. They are still able to use a handheld calculator, right? So if a kid, with the same rules for handheld calculators, right? So they can still bring a calculator with them and use that on the exam, right? Like me personally, I'd probably still use that because I think punching buttons is easier than typing on a keyboard when it comes to a calculator. But they will have access to a calculator on the exam, even without a physical one that they bring with them um, to the exam. Is there any effort to encourage colleges to accept exam scores, change their higher ed? Yeah. So the short version is yes. We have a whole team of people who are in charge of working with and collaborating with and communicating to higher education institutions across the world, right? So, mostly in the United States because that's where we're focused, right? But they do actually talk to international schools as well. We actually do. We've been talking to a great majority of higher ed faculty. A lot of those faculty are being used for the standard setting, where we're actually going to hope, set what the scores need to be to earn a 5.4, 3.2, and a 1 on the exam. So if you are on this call and you're interested in partaking in that standard setting process, send me your email address because I can put you on that list. You get paid. And so, it's not a volunteer situation. So shoot me an email if you're interested in participating and helping us figure out where to cut those scores to align them with colleges, right? So you want to get as much input from as many different schools as we possibly can, so we can be as close to the overall average and serve as many different people as we can. So I think what, and again, what we have found, and this was, there was some press about this at the beginning of the year, is that essentially the general trend. So we've changed the way that we set the standards for the courses, right? So as assessment research evolves over time, so does our methods of assessment, right? And that is an area of research that people choose to spend their lives researching. And thank goodness for those people, because otherwise we would just do the same thing over and over again. But what we what we're doing, right? So we're essentially aggregating a lot more data from a lot more people. This multi-dimensional data, we're able to process it and take in a huge amount of information and use that information to better guide our decisions about where to put those cut scores, right? And how to determine how many students should be earning a 5 based on what score and a 4 and a 3 and 2 and 1. And the trend so far after using this new process with this multidimensional analysis from many, many, many data points is that the AP courses that have had lower passing rates tend to have much higher qualifying score rates, right? Like, so they found that in this subjects that have undergone this new revised process. And then it turns out that the subjects that have already been having pretty successful success rates is that those are actually probably already in line kind of with what's actually happening outside in the higher ed institutions by and large. And so um, I don't see any reason that physics would be outside that trend, right? I mean, like, I can't guarantee anything. I don't know. I don't know what the data is going to show, right? Like, we're scientists, so I'm going to wait and see what the data says. But so far, the data says physics isn't so special that we would be outside of the trend of what all the other subjects have done. I do also think it's important to maybe consider sort of like selection bias when talking to physics kids about what schools get credit or not, right? So the physics students, especially the AP physics students, from my experience, were like the overest achievers of all the overachievers, right? And so those students typically were looking at very competitive colleges to go to. So I taught south of Boston. So all my kids wanted to go to, BU, Harvard, MIT, right? Like, so they're all applying to these like super competitive East Coast schools. And so, yes, those super competitive schools have competitive admissions, right? But that the great majority of schools, right, the great majority of higher ed institutions actually have pretty reasonable acceptance and credit policies, right? And so, um, to encourage students to look beyond just the score. I also had plenty of students where it's like the value of taking the exam. First of all, I think there's always value in practicing high stakes performance, right? Like always in your life, you will have times when you have to perform in a high stakes, stressful environment, whether that's on a test or a football game or a presentation with random people from the internet or whatever. And so like that practice is always good. I also found that for most of my students, if they didn't get credit and they took that class in college, then they were like, "Oh, Mr. P, like that was super easy," and it was easy peasy, and I got to like hang out, and I didn't have to worry about it. And then their freshman year of college, that's just one less thing they have to worry about, and all the things that a freshman in college away from home is worrying about, right? It's one less thing. I don't really have to worry about my physics homework, right? So I can figure out where to eat dinner and like how to find friends as I'm away from home or whatever, right? So there are benefits to it, even if it's not just college credit. Um, so there you go. But that be right. So okay, previous years my P1 students were 3 to 5, and then this year maybe they're scoring higher. So again, we're trying to make sure, so as part of this adjustment, we're trying to make sure that P1 especially is uh normalized in the right in the appropriate way for what a P1 equivalent college course would be. And I think with that, students are doing better. Scratch paper, yes. Um, yeah, there was a recommendation to swap out AP1 for honors, which has a thing. We can talk about that anyway. I think lots of schools did that. Desmos calculator. It's the combination one. I think there's graphing, right? So this Desmos calculator can graph. Students, oh, this is a good question. So students can access Blue Book. I'm actually not sure of the exact instructions yet, but yes, students will have a Blue Book practice exam experience available to them soon. We are finishing up essentially the entry of the problems that will be in that practice session. So yeah, so it is the same app as the PSAT, SAT, right? It's called Blue Book. It's the same app. So if they've taken the PSAT or SAT, they have used it, but there are slight differences for the AP version of, like, there are extra things that the AP questions require the app to do. The questions that students will see in the practice are the questions in the course and exam descriptions. So we didn't want to put secure material on that practice exam, right? But so though, if you look in the course exam descriptions, those free response questions and those multiple choice questions will be the kind of sampler, so that you and your students can see what the exam will look like and feel like on the app, and then hopefully prepare them mentally and visually for what that's going to look like. But yeah, so soon there will be more instructions and information coming about how you would download that app preemptively, and then how to get practice on it before the exam. What college students are being used for AP1? So what's interesting about this is that the scores for the AP1 are actually based on the scores of students in the next course, right? So what we do is there's a data correlation between how a student who took AP Physics 1 does in Physics 2 at college, and how a student who did not take AP Physics 1 does in Physics 2 in college. And so what happens then is that the data tends to say that, hey, the kid that does, gets a 4 on the AP Physics 1 exam tends to get a B in AP Physics 2. And so then colleges say, well, if you're going to get a B in AP Physics 2 after having taken AP Physics 1, we're just going to kind of like retroactively copy paste that grade back a semester. That's essentially kind of how it works. And then what we have been finding, again, with this multi-dimensional new aggregation of data from a lot more data points, is that that's actually like the number of students who have that correlation is much higher than we previously thought, right? Using other older methods of data analysis, right? And so there should be more students who get Bs in Physics 2 than maybe have gotten 4s, right? And so we're trying to adjust that and make sure that those correlations are the right proportions and the right correlations. And as the methods to do that are improving and expanding, in part because of computation power and access to information, we can improve the methods by which we correlate test scores and student performance, which is exciting. I think it's ultimately good for students, and it does a much better job of showing what they are capable of doing and what they have done over the year. That's 12 o'clock. I think I answered everything in chat. Was there anything I didn't answer that someone has like a burning question that I didn't answer? I know we're at time. Predictors for raw score is still relevant. I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know. I think a good ballpark is still probably relevant, but I honestly don't know. That's that's an unsatisfactory answer. If I was in the classroom still, I'd probably do like a 75% for a 5, a 60% for a 4, 45 to 50% for a 3. That'd be my ballpark. I made those numbers up on like what I would do if I was a teacher. I have zero clue. But I think those are ish. I don't know. Feels right-ish. The other thing I've told teachers to do too is like, if you have students from last year, like your rock star student, or your middle high rock star students, right? Like, how many questions did they used to get right on the exams? And then you give them the new practice exams. How many questions do they get right on the new ones? Right. And then you can maybe use that as a correlation to kind of see, is it similar? Is it higher? Is it lower? Hopefully it's higher, I think. But
All
oh yeah,
right.
so
Oh, is there another question?
just my email address. It's up
Oh, yes.
earlier in the chat, but I will put it again here in the chat right now.
And
Yeah.
there is also now a link to the PoLS-T website and our YouTube channel where this talk will get posted. There's also our previous talks there. If you want to join the network because you want to know more about the topics that are important to physics teachers, there's also the link there. And by joining the network, that means you get to know when our talks are. You're welcome to do more with us, but that is the kind of where you can get information sent to you. Um, a couple of other things. So first of all, thank you so much, John, for talking and answering teachers' questions. I know that there's a lot of stress around being an AP teacher, and I think it really helps to get people information and share that in a lot of ways. Um, for what's coming up, we do have a coffee talk, which is linked in the chat. It is November, it's in like 2 weeks-ish. So that'll be linked in that coffee talk. That it will be more informal. We'll be sharing ideas of resources for AP. Some of these things about like how do you actually convert these to grades might be a good thing to bring up in that coffee talk. I know John will be there, and it's just a way to connect with other teachers and get information and share how we actually do this. And then we will have more talks coming up, probably sometime in January or February, on other topics of interest to physics teachers and not just AP physics teachers. This would be anyone from, middle school through college interested in teaching lots of different things. So look for those talks. Oh, there's the coffee talk link if you need that, or if you sign up for the network, you will also get that via email as well. Other than that, I just want to say thank you again for coming, guys. Thank you to John. I know you'll probably stick around for a few more minutes if you have last minute questions or you have his email address. And thank you for everything you do to teach physics and for coming today. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
It'll be good. If anyone has like last minute questions before John logs off, otherwise we will thank you again for coming and for spending Saturday morning with us.